Thank you for being here on opening day of Albuquerque Film and Music Experience 2023. In case I didn't introduce myself, I'm Kira. I'm the Director of Operations. And Ivan Wiener, our Executive Director, is doing what he does best right now, so he will join us shortly. So before we start our next event, which is the Center Stage Conversation number 1, what you need to know about entertainment law, we would like to thank our presenting sponsors, the AFME Foundation, Albuquerque Film and Media Incubator, Albuquerque Film Office and Film Liaison, Cindy McCrossan, who's in the room right now, so hug her. Bernalillo County Commissioner Stephen Michael Quezada, Presa Terreno Italia, Olive Oil, Enchantment Rain Films, iHeartMedia, Larry Schwartz and Wells Fargo Advisors, Jouska Road Productions, Bertucci's Bar Roma, Real Solutions Airport Meet and Greet Service, Sunny 505, the historic Lobo Theater, University of New Mexico Film and Digital Arts, and Quiet Media. So I want to introduce our fabulous moderator, Karen Criswell, who is also a fabulous filmmaker, producer, and on our advisory board. Karen is the former VP of Operations for DreamWorks Studios. She ran strategy and support for the teams behind a slate of interactive games, music development deals, narrative films, and television productions that occurred during her 18-year tenure. Her time at the studio included 3 Best Picture Oscars for American Beauty, Gladiator, and Beautiful Mind. She left in 2014 to focus on her company, Concept Films, and creative work in film, television, documentary, and emerging new media. Please welcome Karen Criswell.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Kira. Thank you, AFMX. I'm so honored to be here today with all of you to kick off this amazing festival. So another big round of applause, please, for AFMX and everyone that put this together. It's a big undertaking, and they do an amazing job. I'm very excited to be here today with our first center stage conversation with Michael Helfant. Michael is of Counsel at Loeb Loeb. He represents a wide range of clients in all aspects of film and television development, production, financing, and distribution. He brings to his practice more than 3 decades of hands-on experience as a senior executive in the entertainment industry. Michael has held many executive-level positions at some of the leading film production and distribution companies. For instance, before forming his own production company, Amasia Entertainment, Michael served as president CEO of Marvel Studios, where he oversaw pretty much everything. What distinguishes Michael is that he also has decades of experience executing and operating agreements through to distribution. He's also a producer, and he knows what's viable and what's not from an operational standpoint. Please give a warm round of applause to Michael Helfant.
Thank you very much. It's actually, it's a real pleasure for me to be part of the opening event for this year's festival. I'm excited to be here, and I know it's going to be an amazing week for Albuquerque and for AFMX.
We're going to go through about 5 different segments. We're going to give you a sort of a high-level overview. This is a lot. Entertainment law it seeps into every single aspect of creating filmed entertainment, and we want to try to give you as much key highlights as we can. So it's a lot of information, but I think it's going to be really incredibly important. As mentioned in his bio, Michael's kind of a trifecta. It's not so usual to have someone who is an attorney, an executive, and a producer. So he has a 365-degree sort of, I think, really great perspective on filmmaking from the legal standpoint, and it's super critical for all of you who are really interested in producing and making film. So if we could go to the first slide, please. We're going to start where everything starts, in development, and talk about some of the key critical components that you need to make sure that you start with at the script stage so that when you're ready to get your film out into the market, that you set yourself up for success. So why don't you go through some of those things for our audience?
Okay, and I want to take a moment before we jump into development, just to give you kind of some context and set the stage. So why is the law so critical in entertainment? I mean, if you think about it, if you're a manufacturer of widgets, whether it's chairs, whatever it might be, your assets, you go into a warehouse, you count how many chairs you have, you count how many widgets you have, and your liabilities are based on how much it's going to cost you to make that stuff and distribute. In the entertainment industry, our assets are the contractual rights that you have and acquire to exploit intellectual property. So by definition, the value of those assets are determined by those contractual provisions. And not just your assets, but frankly, your obligations and liabilities. So it is really important that the documents relating to the content that you're creating or that anyone's creating, is clear and makes it very clear who owns what and what rights you have and what rights other people have. And to that end, philosophically, the agreements, if I tell you the agreements for entertainment, whether it's television, film, they range from short form deal memos to long form contracts. I mean, the studios typically, you can have an option agreement that's 40, 50 pages long, and then you can have an option agreement that's 10 pages long. Distribution agreements. I recently did a distribution agreement for an independent production that was over 100 pages for a distribution agreement. Forget the cost of what it means to actually negotiate and transact that, but it's just they have the luxury of the studios they have tons and tons of lawyers in-house, and they dot every I and cross every T. I've always taken the position that as a practical matter, if you can say it in less words, then let's do it. Let's, try and focus on the critical points that not just the deal points that are the obvious, money and credit and back end and all that, but, key legal points, but not to get bogged down in, endless long form documentation. Now, the risk of that is, I tell my clients, we can't cover every eventuality and every contingency in a shorter form document. But let me tell you, my experience has been, whether you have a 10-page option agreement or a 50-page option agreement, if it's so much more about who's on the other side of that table from you, because you could have a extensively negotiated contract, and if the person on the other side of that deal wants to give you grief and a hard time, they can do it and they will do it. And conversely, if you don't have every contingency, worked out in a shorter form agreement, but you're dealing with people that are honorable and good people, you know what? And you have a common interest, an alignment of interest. I always try and find that place. Then people have a reason to resolve issues and disputes in an amicable way. And I would always prefer to, resolve problems amicably than go to litigation. So with that,
Absolutely.
I hope that gave you a sense of my approach to the law. And as Karen said, because I've had so much practical experience, I focus on things that where I've gotten bit in the ass on. And so I worry about the things that, practically I know are going to be more of an issue than the things that are just, legal boilerplate that will probably never, ever mean anything. So that's my approach, and I feel it gives my clients the benefit of my practical experience as much as possible.
Absolutely. And I believe that, like, from an indie producer perspective, which I have done in the past, I think what's great about Michael's approach is that you don't have to be daunted by the legal aspects of the business that you are creating when you are developing a film project. Your relationships matter, but you also need to make sure that you cross your T's and dot your I's, and you can do it in a way that's digestible. It doesn't have to be this huge behemoth, agreement like the studios and the streamers do. So I think in the development stages is when all of the seeds for all of this legal work get planted. So I'm going to have Michael kind of move into that development stage and really talk about some of the things we have up on the screen that are important for you to key into.
Okay, so it starts with, what are you basing your content on? Is the content an original idea, an original screenplay, or is it based on some pre-existing intellectual property? Maybe a book, maybe a remake of a prior film, maybe based on life story rights of living individuals, or it could be frankly based on public domain, intellectual property that's now gone into the public domain, and you could, anyone can make a movie based on Romeo and Juliet. Just make sure that your version of Romeo and Juliet isn't like a protectable version of Romeo and Juliet that someone else has made. But clearly, if you're starting with an original idea, an original screenplay, that's the simplest. It's easy. You need to acquire the rights, or if you're creating it, you need to make sure that you're protected. One of the things that often happens early in development that I've seen a lot is that people are excited about collaborating with other people, and someone might have a screenplay or an idea and they say, well, let's do this together, we'll do this, we'll figure this out, and they collaborate on a screenplay or a treatment as a basis for a film or television series, and then they go to pitch it, and it's all good when people are behaving and everything's friendly, but it's amazing how many times when the deal and the money starts to become relevant, how people suddenly find areas to disagree about. And so it's really, really important to have a clear understanding with your collaborators. I've been on not one, but on several instances where a writer-director was developing a screenplay, and we hired the writer-director and they deliver the script, we're going to make the movie, and lo and behold, we get a claim from a research assistant that was hired by the director, claiming that they contributed to the screenplay, and suddenly you've got a rights problem. And whether you are creating the screenplay yourself and owning it, or if you're hiring someone as a work made for hire, in which case you need a piece of paper that tells you that the company that's paying for this foundational document, treatment, screenplay for your content, that it is in fact owned by the party that's paying for it. That all needs to be established, because if it's not, the writers or people who contribute creatively do have a basis for making a claim, and that's a problem. And one of the things that Ken and I wanted to instill upon everyone was that, you have to have a clear chain of title, and if you're taking care of what you need to take care of earlier on, it won't be a problem. Because if you get to production and you can't get what we call errors and omissions insurance, which protects you against claims by people who are claiming they have an interest in the underlying property, you can't get insurance, you can't get distribution. It's a nightmare. So, starting and being focused on locking up your legal rights and making it very clear who owns what and what you're obligated to do with respect to other people. It's really, really important at the beginning.
Absolutely. And I think as producers, your job is to sort of shepherd this project safely into the marketplace. And one of the key elements to doing that is making certain that you've buttoned up all of these deals in development, so that you don't get to the final analysis and get into a conversation about distribution, and then it all falls apart. And then that's it. And then that project sits on the shelf and collects dust because you didn't do your homework in the beginning. I've actually know several people that have had that happen to them, and then they have to backtrack. And backtracking at the back end, what you should have started in the beginning, like Michael just laid out, that is one of the most painful processes.
Oh yeah, there's the expression, pay me now or pay me later, but it's going to cost a lot more later.
Absolutely.
because cleanup is always a lot harder.
Yeah.
One of
That's,
the-
are you, oh, did you have more on
Well,
development?
I had one other thought, which is sometimes frequently people want to make content about true stories, life stories, and that can be tricky if people are, public figures. This is where I'm going to make the general comment that we talked about, which is I'm pointing out, where there are a lot of landmines along the way, and we're going to try and identify them for you. But the reality is, when you get into production or creating content of your own, you really need to hire, appropriate and capable legal counsel along the way, because life story rights is a perfect example. A lot of stuff for people are public figures. You can fictionalize to a degree, you can tell their story, but what you can't do if someone's alive and they have that, and they own and control their life story rights. And then there's the issue about sometimes celebrities retain their publicity rights well beyond their death. So you got that issue. But you cannot tell certain aspects of a person's story, even if it's a public figure. So yeah, anything that you document and annotate, this was reported in this newspaper, this showed up in a book. Frequently, it's a good idea to get an option on a book that relates to the life figure, but you can't make up scenes and stories between the life story figure and their spouse or other people in a private room, unless if you can backstop that with some sort of source material. So it can be very tricky, and unless if you can get clearance on a life story project, you're not going to be able to get it financed or distributed.
So that leads us into our next category that we're going to cover today, which is financing. And a lot of these issues bleed from one area to the other as we move through the process. But if you've developed your script or you're optioned your rights to your story, then you have to go out and get financing. And that is a whole nother set of legal issues that you need to absolutely pay attention to set up your project so that you can actually get it funded, produced, and distributed. So let's talk about financing.
Well, along the way from development to financing, the other thing that you probably will need to do is package the project, bringing on board talent that will help support getting a financier excited about putting up money and risking capital. If you're Chris Nolan and you write a screenplay, you don't have to worry about who your star is, because you can hire whoever you want and you'll get financing. But most of us have to, package up the material and bring on an exciting director or an exciting star to motivate people. There are many, many ways to finance your content. The simplest is, of course, if you could set it up with a studio or a television company or a streamer, and they're going to write the check and finance everything. And you know what? There's a lot to be said for that, because you create the content, you make sure you get paid, a reasonable fee on the front end, have a good entertainment lawyer negotiating your back end, and you get to worry a lot less about all the detail and the production. But oftentimes you're not able to do that. There are thousands and thousands of projects clamoring for those slots at all the studios and the streamers. And so, most of us are independently financing movies, and there are multiple ways to do that. The simplest form of independent financing would be pure equity. And you have one or more financiers who are putting up the financing for a production. And it's really important, again, to have a clear understanding with your financier in a legal document that establishes what your entitlements are and what the financier's entitlements are and what your respective obligations are. The danger about financing a film or television series, maybe more so, with all equity, is that it's all at risk, because, sadly, there's a lot of content that gets made and has a really hard time finding distribution. So sometimes, if you can, what we call pre-sale. We license the rights to different parts of the marketplace. Sometimes you're licensing all rights in a foreign territory, and you have a foreign sales agent, and they can go out and bring back 25, 30 contracts with commitments to pay on delivery. And you take that bundle of contracts and you can go to a bank. There are plenty of banks and institutional lenders that will finance based on contractual commitments. You know, it has to be, it can't just be, show me the film and if I like it, I'll pay you $1 million. They lock them up. We know how to lock up these agreements and make them, structure them in a way that banks feel comfortable. And then your cost of capital is, you know, prime plus 2% instead of having to give away half the movie. And in order to do that, one of the other things that we wanted to mention and make sure is, you know, banks and institutional lenders require what's called a completion bond. And a completion bond, funny enough, it's the structure of an independently financed film. It's not too unlike the structure of a real estate deal where they have surety completion guarantors. The completion bond company basically says to the financier that we will complete and deliver this film by a date certain in accordance with the pre-approved screenplay and production schedule and budget. And if the film is going to go over budget, we will pay the additional costs of going over budget. And if we fail to deliver the film on time and in accordance with the specifications that were agreed, we will pay you back the money that you put up. And that is a very powerful tool and thing to be able to say to a financier, because, you know, a lot of them are going, well, what happens if you go over budget? And the answer to that is that can be a big problem. And, you know, you're chasing money if shit happens and now you're over budget, and what do you do? And then when you go back to find additional financing to complete and deliver, it's always on, you know, more painful terms because you need that money to finish your production. So very important to have good financiers and a completion bond company. I will add one last thing. A lot of directors and a lot of creative talent are very anxious about completion bond companies. Why? Because one, they're a watchdog for the financiers, and that can be a good thing at times. But two, in order to fulfill their obligations, they do have the legal right to take over the production in order to complete and deliver. And the director and the producers and everyone involved have to follow the instructions of the completion guarantor. Now, let me tell you, the last thing they want to do is actually take over the movie. That's a pain. It's a trouble. They will do everything before that to try and make sure that this train stays on the track. And I learned very early in my career, the first feature film I ever worked on, I'm gonna date myself, back in 1983. I was at Loeb Loeb at the time. This is my second tour of duty. And I was representing a company called Film Finances, which is still the premier and most established completion bond company in the business. And it was for a little film that independently financed. The star had put up $2 million of his own money, and Warner Brothers was coming in to distribute for another $5 million. It was a $7 million movie, and they had to get a completion bond. And the first cut of that movie was apparently, I didn't see it personally, was apparently very troubled. And the bank officer, I remember saying, she walked out of the screen, she was crying because she was convinced they were never going to pay her the $5 million back. Well, P.S., it was a first-time director, first-time producers, and this star had never really starred in a feature-length movie. And they brought they embraced the completion bond company. I remember they brought on a post-production exec to representative from the bond company to help them remold the film in post-production. And that film, I'm very happy to say, was a film called Purple Rain, which was a tremendous success. And it was a great lesson for me to see how helpful a bond company could be to an independent production, and then to have it be, that the whopping success that it was. So they can be a great resource. They know, by the way, I always vet on all my productions. I vet all the crew, line producers, production designers, who's difficult, who's not difficult. Production is you have a lot of moving parts, and you want to minimize the number of bumps in the road along the way. And because they have so much information, access to information about visual effects companies, individuals, they can guide you very well on who not to hire and who to hire.
One of the other things that I found when I first looked at the list of requirements to get a completion bond, it is a lot of the documentation that we've already started talking about with the development and financing phases of your project, but it's like a what to do list for producers so that you make sure that you are taking care of all of the aspects of your project. And there are lists out there. I think a couple of sites online, Rapbook, a couple places list everything for completion bond companies that you need to have. And whether or not you actually do as an indie producer go out and get a completion bond, although I agree with Michael, it's a great thing to have because they can save you in the long run, like the example that he gave, but it's also just a great checklist for you of the things that you should have on your project. And I think that helps a lot with the financing process, and it'll also help you into production.
Yeah, and you know what? On my movies, when we prepare budget, we prepare a post-production schedule, all our schedules. Yeah, you do have to have. They're not on the hook until 100% of the budget has been financed, and the money is either sitting in a bank or secured in a way that they know that they've got all of the budget financing and they get paid their fee. But they do require all your chain of title documents have to be locked up. They errors and omissions insurance, general liability insurance, all of that. But I frequently say if the bond company, they scrutinize your budget and your schedule pretty aggressively. And my comment to my executives and the producers on our films and people we're working with is they're going to ask the questions, and I want to know that we have the answers. And if they ask a hard question that we don't have the answer to, then we got to do our homework and we got to figure out what the answer is. I want to be as prepared as possible because, you lay your plans and then you better have contingency plans because, I have this theory about production. It's something always goes wrong or happens, and I start every production with, what is it going to be this time? and
And there's always something. A very wise person once told me is that you plan for absolutely everything that you can think of that will go wrong so that you have a little bit of bandwidth left for the stuff that you didn't think about. And there's always one or two things at least that you didn't think about that could turn your production sideways. But if you've planned for everything that you can think of, then you have the bandwidth to deal with those little emergencies that crop up along the way. And it's
100%.
overwhelming. And so I think that's a great segue for us into production. We'll go to the next slide. And because I think we're already sort of dipping our toe in the water about that. And thank you for getting the last slide. I forgot, so I failed in my duties, but thank you. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Melody. Appreciate you. You all are great. So we'll move into production now because there is a whole slew of agreements, thousands, if you have a very large production, or hundreds at least. I don't want to exaggerate too much.
Thousands, even on a small production.
Yeah, that's gonna be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and small productions can be as challenging as big productions. They're, you have a smaller crew and fewer days that you're shooting, but there's a lot of work even on a small production. You want to talk about how many different areas you can get in trouble?
Let's do that because there is a zillion. I'm not over exaggerating.
So there's again another instance where make sure you have very good production counsel. And by the way, a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of specialization among us entertainment lawyers. So some lawyers are much stronger on financing, representing banks, financiers, and then other lawyers are really great in distribution, and other lawyers are production counsel. And the thing about good production counsel is you do want to try and streamline the process as much as possible, meaning they have great forms for clearance of rights, for crew agreements, crew deals, the key actor agreements and the key chain of title and the director, producers, those are usually a little more specialized, but you want to try and be as efficient as you can, but still make sure that everything is documented properly. And let me tell you, like everything that you see on screen has to be clear, whether that's an individual, and then you have the right to use their name and likeness pursuant to an acting agreement, or the work of some visual effects company, or so many people, inexperienced production designers and young filmmakers, they throw shit on the wall and they film it, and then someone realizes, wait a second, do we have clearance on that picture? And it might be a piece of fine art, and it might be something crazy. A great clearance story, of course, that just popped into my head was the movie Hangover. Warner Brothers, huge studio, right? Well, they didn't quite realize that tattoo on the side of Mike Tyson's face was fine art, and the artist, the tattoo artist who drew that on Mike Tyson's face made a massive claim, and it was a big problem. And the studio had to pay out. And now, of course, so many actors have tats. One of the first things that, in production, I tell the production crew is, any actor that shows up with tattoos, you either have to have a plan to cover those tattoos, or you want to see in writing a release from the tattoo artist. I know that sounds crazy. And think about how many actors have tattoos. It's become, since the Hangover case, it's become a real issue. But everything, locations, if you're driving by and you're not featured, it's actually, in my career, I've noticed it's become a little more flexible. So I'll give you an example. In the old days, if you had a can of Coca-Cola sitting on a table or in the scene in the background, you had to clear it, or someone wasn't gonna exclude it from errors and omissions. Everything that was on. Now there's a little, in terms of products that are sitting there, if something's in the background on a shelf and you're not featuring it and it's not being shown in a derogatory way, there definitely is a little more flexibility about what you can show. But anything that's featured, if an actor grabs it, picks it up, touches it, certainly anything that is negatively commented on, there are all kinds of issues. And one of the things that we make sure you get in the beginning of your production, there are companies that you can give your screenplay to, and it's called a clearance report, and they will identify names of characters in your screenplay and locations and anything that is potentially a clearance problem, and then you coordinate with your lawyer about what do we need to clear and what kind of documentation we have. And frequently you change the name. Like if that name's going to be a problem, then change it. And sometimes the more times a name is used, the more Joe Smiths there are, then the less of a problem you have. But Michael Helfant, you could have a problem. I don't have that many.
Well, and it's things like, even fashion and name brand clothing and things like that that are really identifiable as brands for different companies that you may not think because there's not an identifiable logo on that piece of clothing or jacket or, whatever the product might be. I think product placement companies also can help in terms of those
Yeah.
clearances so
Yeah.
that you make sure that you're, and sometimes it can even be beneficial for you.
100%.
It's advertising for them, and that can
Yep.
be advertising dollars towards your budget. It's not huge dollars usually, especially for indie producers, but it can be super helpful.
Yeah, sometimes it's just about they comp you, stuff to put in your movie, so you're not paying for it, and then it's cleared
I'm
right
giving
right
you the
up.
rights,
Right.
which is
But
really important.
sometimes, by the way, it can be amazing. Like when I was at Marvel and we were doing Iron Man, as you can imagine, there were quite a few companies, car companies, vying for placement in the movie, and we ended up doing a deal with Audi to feature their brand new R8 sports car when Robert Downey Jr. drives up in front of the Disney Hall. And I can't tell you the numbers, but there were a lot of them. And it was for both placement and a commitment for marketing around the time of release. So, there are ways to take advantage of the challenges, and I encourage you thinking about that in the process.
Films are a great marketing tool, and as agencies have less and less places that they can go out and market their product, films have become really, I think, at the forefront for a lot of ad agencies for their products and their brands.
Music, we just want to make sure.
Music, yes, and production.
So is often the step filed in your budget squeezed for, in general, but music and video. So it always seems like you have less in the budget than you need. But again, it's one of those things. Everything that goes into the film or the television content by the way, let me broaden it out. Any kind of content. If you're making content, for short form content, anything that's going to require, genuine distribution, you need to clear it. Social media is a whole nother reality, and it's created for a lot of people. Seems to be my mic going in and out a little. Is it okay now? All right, how's that? So with some social media and influencers, they just throw on their video and pray. And if they're promoting something, they usually don't get grief about it. But so if you have music in your content, everything has to be cleared. You hire a composer, and again, it's the flip side of clearing it is, well, if you hire a composer, then you should own the musical compositions, and you frequently do. And sometimes instead of licensing a song to use, maybe you have a song created for you, and then you own the song. But it can get complicated, and again, now you need a production lawyer who specializes in music work. So it's another aspect. But just again, be thinking everything that goes into the content. You need to acquire the rights. It's public domain, or you can't use it. It was airline rights. Airline rights. Have you guys been on the airlines lately? It used to be they had like 2 movies that they licensed for a month or 3, and you watched whatever it was. If you did, now they have libraries of titles available, and those rights can be very lucrative. So always be thinking in terms of the bundle of rights that is that's not necessarily required to be given. And as you can imagine, distributors fight for all of these ancillary rights and subsidiary production rights, which sometimes you have to give the distributor or the financier, depending upon how early they came on board, whether this property existed previously. Sometimes if you can hold on to the rights, then they're going to want to write a first negotiation to distribute the sequel on similar terms. And the number of permutations goes on and on and on. But there's a lot to fight about in distribution.
Yes, and which is why it's so critically important that you have an attorney who can negotiate on your behalf and make sure that you get the best deal that you can and that your project gets to the best home that it can be in. So it's going to get the most exposure, because what does that do? Then that helps you make your next movie. So, which is really critical.
I can't tell you how often people have come to me and they've signed a short form distribution deal memo, and film's languishing and they're not making, and what's happening? No communication and nothing. And God, it's so hard to unwind a distribution agreement that's been signed without proper counsel. And so, again, it's obviously every circumstance is different, and sometimes you can find attorneys to work on contingency, but not so easy on the production side. And but believe me, if you have something of value, you want to take care of it and protect it as much as possible, because for people who actually own these properties and films, I mean, they're like the golden goose. They keep on, they're the long tail. They keep on generating revenue over a very long life cycle. Obviously, that can go down. And then there's always the moment that comes along where you own content and, there's a new technology that shows up, or when the streamers first came on board, they were buying up tons of old library content. And, families have, done very well over the generations owning intellectual property of the kind that we are all aspiring to make.
Which leads us to our next topic. We have the next slide. This is everyone's new buzzword is AI. We're thankful that the writer strike feels like it's over. Yay. It's
Yay.
exciting, and hopefully SAG will be soon. But AI really drove a lot of those conversations, and I think it's something that we all kind of are aware of, but not necessarily about the legal ramifications of how it affects our productions and our producing, intellectual property going forward. So we felt like it was an important component to sort of wrap up the conversation with, as it is sort of on everybody's, top of the list right now. So
One of the key issues, or at least the starting issue, is like when we're talking about development, like, making sure that you own it. So the question is, what AI content is protectable? There have been some recent cases, even one as recently as a month ago. Autonomously created AI content is not protectable under U.S. copyright law, because copyright law says that it protects works of authorship by human beings. So what does that mean? Okay. Because the reality is, we've all been using at least computer-generated, enhanced content for a long, long time, in visual effects and otherwise. And, nobody has really questioned up until now that visual effects are not work for hire for the company that engaged the visual effects company. And, an example that I told Karen about was I worked on a really wonderful film in the 90s called What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams. And when he dies and goes to heaven, he wakes up in what we call painted world, where he's literally in an oil painting. And there was not any existing software to do that effect. And so we had to combine software and create software and do R&D. And you're basically telling the computer, take Robin's image and move him from this side of the frame to this side of the frame, and have the paint go on his body and move with him. And then you hit a button and you hit render, and the computer generates the movement through that frame. And why is that protectable? Okay, so one of the things that was made clear in this recent case was that in order for AI content to be protectable, it has to have a sufficient amount of direction, involvement from a human being that basically says, do this, color it this way. As long as there's a substantial amount of human interaction directing the AI in the creation of that content, then you have something that is predictable. When I was just doing a little prep for this conversation, I was reading about, they made an analogy to early photographs, because photographs are made by machines that are not human beings. And there was an early challenge to whether photographs could be protected content. And there are a lot of photographs that are not protected. If you just if you have a computer just taking pictures and randomly, not protected, right? But what gives photographs protection is the composition of what you're shooting, the lighting, the subject, the angle that you're shooting at. All of those are creative elements that have now been clearly established to allow protection as a work of authorship. So be careful about just generating content off of the chatbots and AIs and all that, because not only may it not be protectable if you invest money in it and then find out you got a problem, but there are even lawsuits now where authors are suing the AI companies for using their protected content, either parts of it and or for training purposes, and that's a problem, because they say the AI companies say that they're telling the AI computers not to plagiarize, but how much is required for it to be an infringement of copyright? A great reference point back to your musical experiences in the early days of hip hop. You have no idea what a nightmare it was, because all of these artists and rappers were sampling. What does sampling mean? They would take four of a pre-existing song and put it into their new song, and then they'd go to exploit it, and it's like, well, no, you can't exploit that. Those four measures are owned by the owner of the original song, and frequently for sampling, you give away 50% of the publishing of that song. So it's like, okay, I get it, and creatively, works really amazingly well in some. But so it doesn't take a lot of protected material to be incorporated into your new content to cause a problem. That's on the protectability issue. Then let's talk about the writer issues and the SAG issues. Anything in particular you want me to, or just jump in?
Let's talk about writers, since the writer's strike just came. I haven't had a chance to bone up too much on the
I haven't had a chance to go through the
details
new.
of what the final analysis was, but I know that the writers' strike is on everyone's mind. So maybe let's talk about writers, and then we'll wrap it so that we have enough time for questions, because I want to make sure we have audience questions.
So from the creator standpoint, what's the anxiety about AI? Well, from the writer standpoint, it was, we don't want the studios and producers to go and generate a first draft of a treatment or a screenplay, and then hire the writer to do a rewrite instead of an original screenplay. And of course, what you have to pay for a rewrite is significantly less than what you pay for an original screenplay. So the concern, that whole fight about who can they use AI? Can they use it to do revisions? All of that. I mean, frankly, at least certainly in the moment we're in, there's no way, in my opinion, that AI can create, the kind of written material that has the heart and that a human being can create. I'm an playing drums my whole life, and I wear this hat that when the drum machines came into play, my hat says, "Drum machines have no soul." So it's like,
Which is very true.
but clearly, AI can give you an outline, can aggregate information very effectively. So now there are restrictions, I understand, in the new WGA agreement that prevent, and restrict, when the studios and the producers can use AI. By the way, the DGA, the Directors Guild, settled that issue very quickly, and they agreed to form, have ongoing dialogue because, they don't want AI directing, but nobody's going to really be asking AI to direct so quickly. So they figured in the next 3 years, they'll figure out how it impacts them to a greater degree. With SAG and the actors, their big concern was, can you take their image and then have, AI basically act for them and use them in multiple instances. I know that was a concern. We'll see how it gets resolved. The reality is, and they were worried about that once they had their image, that the AI could use their image in other content, right? Subsequent productions. Most agreements, certainly with leading actors, but most agreements restrict your right to use the name and likeness of an actor in that one movie, unless if you get permission. And if you want to use a clip from the first movie in a subsequent movie, you have to go and negotiate it and pay a clip rights fee. So, a lot of it, I think, maybe is, concern that will get flushed out over time. But one thing that I do believe is going to happen in the future is there will be movies that star Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe, and there will be actors who license the rights to use their name and likeness, and they said, what, I'll take $1 million and they don't have to work even. They maybe go in and do the voiceover, and otherwise it's like high-end animation, basically. It's photorealistic animation of an actor's name and likeness, and that's coming for sure. What they also say is coming that you can be at home in the future at some point, and you're going to say, I want to see a thriller starring so and so and so and so, and I want a supporting role in the movie, and I want it to be set in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it has a happy ending. And you push a button, and that AI computer is going to generate a film, a piece of content for you. I mean, that's what they're saying is coming. Is that going to be quality content? I have no idea. Probably not. But I think that's a ways off.
Interactive avatars, right?
Which?
It's like interactive avatars of yourself inside a film of your making, so it should be interesting.
But some like the whole, the metaverse. I mean, that's all using, your name and likeness in other contexts. And the metaverse is going to create some opportunities, and I hope it doesn't replicate all of our ills and challenges and problems in real life, because that's what it seems to be doing. Social media too.
It's that intersection that we've got right now that's happening with game technology, with film, and storytelling.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure to be here. Have a great festival.